Hey everybody, I hope you're doing well. I'm sorry that it's been a few months since my last upload. I wanted to post something because I do have a few things that are almost done, including like a special anniversary video for my 1000th video. But I just wanted to post something to let you all know that I'm still here because I've been seeing posts on the subreddit asking if I'm even alive and stuff. And I just wanted to, say hi, yes, I'm still here, and just give you a little bit of information about why I've been gone for so long. So I have had to have a bunch of family members move in with me, and I haven't had an office in a few months. It's been really hard to find a space to actually do recordings. In fact, I don't even have my microphone arm right now, so I'm just holding my microphone up to my face with one hand and the pop filter in front of the microphone with the other, so it doesn't sound like trash, but hopefully there's not like too much rumbling or anything for me holding a microphone. The other thing I've been experiencing is I've been having daily episodes of extremely bad mental health. I won't give too many details on it, but it's something I used to be on medication for, but stopped because it got better. Probably because the medication wasn't a good idea to stop taking it. But I'm getting back. I'm getting back on it. But anyway, that's another reason. Unfortunately, it's been so hard for me to get things done because when these episodes happen, I can't really do anything at all. And like I said, I won't give much more detail than that. And I don't say all this stuff to try to give like excuses as to why I haven't been posting. I'm just trying really to let you all know where I've been, what's been going on, and why videos haven't really been being posted. But things are getting better. But anyway, I just wanted to let you know I am still here. I do have new stuff being worked on. I am going to be posting two videos that are almost done. One's called Beneath the Witch Tree, and then I don't want to give the title of the other one because it's going to be a surprise. And then I'm going to do a few feature videos with Dusklight Radio, Romnex, and Spirit Voices. But yeah, like I said, I just wanted to make or post something so I can let you all know that I am still here. I'm still around. I haven't quit the channel or anything like that. But I also wanted to say that I've noticed there are a few other channels who have started uploading my videos and like naming their channels the Dark Somnium podcast or like the Dark Somnium whatever. I just want to let you know the only channels on YouTube that I have right now are this one and Somnium Music. So any other channel you see that has my videos on it, it's not me. But then I do also have the podcast like on Spotify and iTunes and all that stuff. But yeah, I will probably post some more information in the comment section just about what's been going on. I just didn't want to get into too many details. But anyway, thank you all so much for your support during this time and being patient with me. This community means the world to me, and no, I'm not giving up or quitting or anything like that. With that said, enjoy this video. It's just a compilation I wanted to post up for you all. I hope you have a great day.
When a child is in the hospital, family does whatever it takes to stay. At Ronald McDonald House, we give them a community of support, warm meals, and a place to rest. Because when a child is in the fight of their lives, family stays. And Ronald McDonald House stays with them.
Okay, let me get straight to the point. I do not believe for 1 second that no other child played the bath game growing up. I'm convinced my friends are trolling me, but they're not responding to my messages, and so I'm left with little choice but to bring my question here, hoping someone will know what the hell I'm talking about. I was around 5 or 6 when my babysitter introduced the idea of the bath game to me. She said it was a fun way to engage the imagination and that I could find something truly special within the water. I didn't question it, even then, because she was the boss and I thought she was pretty. I didn't want to make her mad by refusing or risk having my Nintendo taken away if I was disobedient. So, when my mom told her to bathe me one night, I was excited to try it. Her instructions were pretty simple, and I'd come to write them down because with any game, there has to be rules. 1. You must do the bath game alone. These instructions can be given, but you have to be isolated for the game to begin. 2. The tub should have some sort of thick bath soap that includes a lot of suds and a dark liquid. Ensure the top of the water is obscured and the sides are caked in it, including the handles to get out. 3. Only hot water. No cold and no resistance upon getting into the water. If it hurts, it will pass as your skin gets used to it. Ignore any reddening on the skin. 4. Take a deep breath. Make sure it hurts a little, and know that you will not be coming back up for a while. 5. Dive in and don't look back or rise up. Allow the current to take you and keep your eyes open. 6. Your vision will blur, but it will eventually clear and you'll see something in the plug hole. Go to it. 7. Trust in what you see. Let your body relax. 8. When you meet the Sea Emperor and the lights above the water go out, you've won the bath game and you can come up for air. The babysitter was so excited she could barely contain herself, bouncing around and eyes wide, a thick liquid flowing from her eyes. She didn't even bother wiping it up, content to be sharing in my submersion by proxy. I stood there in my bath towel, expecting her to follow me in, but she shook her head, nostrils flaring.
Only you. Rule 1, remember?
She beamed, and I felt my face grow hot. She was so pretty when she stared at me like that, I'd have done anything.
You're special. I can't wait for you to win and get your prize.
What do I get? I was eager, but I had to know. What kid doesn't love prizes? Her lip twitched, and she took a moment to answer, but I remember her expression never changed, not once. Her teeth chattered as she said one word.
Freedom!
I had no idea what she meant, but in my mind I assumed, like any child, it was gaming all night, eating what I wanted, and no school. What kid wouldn't want that? I went in and noticed the bath was already running. A thick black soup I'd used to give myself foam beards was caking the entire tub, save for one spot to safely get in. The water was so hot that it was steaming up the mirror and making my body sweat. Rules 2 and 3 were taken care of, it seemed. A little freaked out, but unperturbed, I took a couple of practice breaths before inhaling deep, feeling the pressure mount and slowly stepping into the tub, careful not to let my feet slip. Even at that age, I knew I could easily hit my head on the faucet and cave my skull in. Nothing was going to stop me from winning this game. The water looked inviting, but murky. The thick paste had covered the top in a layer of foam, with small patches of black liquid poking through. The bottom obscured and creating an illusion of depth. As my feet touched the water, I felt the searing heat ripple through my skin, threatening to tear at the flesh. But you'd be amazed how determined a child can be when a prize is up for grabs. I decided, in my infinite wisdom, that I'd brave it in one go. I exhaled and let my body up to my neck sink down, the pain enough to make me yelp and try to get out, but after a couple of moments, I took in one final deep breath and pushed on, submerging myself fully. Eyes burned and senses dulled in the inky, hot blackness. It felt like swimming through tar, but as the rule suggested, ignoring it was the only way forward. My stomach pushed in protest, and my muscles began to burn, but I focused on letting the current take me, not even questioning how a current was a thing in a bathtub. But I did wonder, was it always this wide and deep? I focused on the sinkhole and saw long, scaled hands protruding from either side, the nails sharp and cracked, soft flesh flapping in the water, coming off in small chunks. It started pushing at the edges of the sinkhole and widening it, my body steadily being pulled towards it as the light above darkened and the burning in my chest became less of a problem. In fact, everything in my body relaxed, and all I had to do was float. I saw into the sinkhole, and it took many years of reflection with an adult mind to figure out what I experienced as a child. Words still fail me 30 years later. They're inadequate and unable to capture the beauty below. A sprawling obsidian city meshed into coral reefs, the pulsated colors I recognized and many I'd never seen before or since. The further I descended, the more blinding the eyes got, as if they were guiding me to land. Further down, at the entrance to the city, 2 large statues loomed on either side of a grand throne. They're imposing, pilot lights swinging on their skulls, orbs for eyes and mouths in places they shouldn't be, one holding the tip of a sword with several spikes running the hilt, the other a grand hammer. It's when I see the throne that I feel the burning in my chest return and something pulling me back and up. It's empty, and yet it's not. Something is sitting upon it, but it isn't. A flickering image, or perhaps my eyes deemed it too much to bear full witness to, but I felt it in that moment. It knew I was disobeying the rules and saw fit to punish me. It craned its horrific skull up towards me, and as it smiled, the eyes blinded me, filling my body with such agony that my ribs felt as if they would snap under the pressure. The eardrums burst and skulls split open. I felt as if I was dying. The next memory I have was being in a hospital bed, unable to speak, and a tube down my throat. I was beyond terrified to be hooked up to machines, and even more scared that I'd let down the babysitter, that the creature in the sinkhole was coming for me. I thrashed around until my mom's concerned face came into focus and she soothed me. Tears stained my face, and I was faced with the long recovery, both physically and mentally. Therapists came and went. None of them believed the bath game was real. Every single one of them told me without fail that my babysitter was simply mentally unwell, had tried to manipulate me and drown me, that all I'd seen was my oxygen-starved brain. But I knew better. Even when she was sentenced to a mental institution and apologized for deceiving me, I knew better. I never deviated from that one pervasive thought that burrowed into my brain like a parasite. I'd failed the game. I bring this all up because I know someone has experienced this. They have to have seen it. It's too specific for one person out of 7.5 billion to have gone through. Does nobody remember the way the tub expanded when you dove in? The widening sinkhole with great hands? The weird, indescribable lights of the coral reefs beneath the tub? The fishmen statues holding artifacts of power? The sea emperor that resides between realities? Everyone in Sturgeon says I'm crazy. They don't believe me, but I'll have proof for them soon. I tried recreating the game myself over the years, but maybe my failure was simply too egregious and the Emperor simply won't allow me to retake it. I've caught glimpses in the steamed-up mirrors, though, promises of what could be if I just show the resolve to go there again. Thankfully, my son can do it for me. He's so excited, having grown up on the stories of what lays beneath the sinkhole in the bathtub. I made him wait until he was older to undertake the game. I had to ensure if he told others, they wouldn't think him too young. I sent him in about a half hour ago. I can only hope the fact he hasn't returned is proof he met the Sea Emperor, but he shouldn't be there much longer, right? I want to go check on him, but because I lost, I don't think I'm permitted to interfere. I even stood outside the door, ready to pull on the handle, but my legs won't stop shaking. I feel my throat close up and sweat run down my head. Perhaps it's a sign not to interfere. Please, someone, anyone, tell me I'm not crazy, that I'm not alone. Someone has to remember the bath game, because as my mind wanders and fear creeps in, all I can think of is the prize my babysitter promised, the prize my son has been promised. Freedom.
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it, just by thinking about it. Meet Base 4.
The days all started with the briefing room, a wall-to-wall palette of aged pastels and stark hospital grayness. In the center of our little room, an oval-shaped table dominated the space, with every seat filled with a tired nurse. From one of the windows, a bar of morning light often slipped stubbornly past the shutters. It was this drab room where we discussed things such as the population of our current patients and whether to up or down their medications. In a work environment prone to shifting each and every day, such meetings were vital to maintain the facility's pulse. As I sipped my morning coffee and slid the bitter warmth down my throat, I could not help but eye the newest face of our staff, a young man with a sharp, short haircut and a stony, unsmiling face. Alec Barnes, a pest. Throughout the entirety of our meetings, he could never just keep quiet, to sit and listen as we resolved any daily conflicts. No, he had to chime in every moment he could, bringing everything to a grinding halt to interject with, "Oh, I have to disagree. Well, where I come from, we did this. If I could just stop you there." A pest indeed. Every clinic had at least one of his sort, hungry to get out there and feel out the unit they'd soon be running. We affectionately referred to them as Weisenheimers, those who can do no wrong, instant virtuosos of the field. These people were easy enough to spot, postures tense with self-conviction, nodding impatiently as you speak to them, as though already knowing what you're about to say and that you are simply moving too slow for their patience. And you, only you, are the one doing things wrong. I can still recall one in particular, a young know-it-all who had become a nuisance during our labs and clinicals, chattering in on how we'd been doing everything incorrectly and not by the books. That is, until one day I'd spied the bag of dopamine she'd secured for a patient draining itself into their sheets. The sheets. Never faster had I seen one's face flush so red. And what happens to that self-importance after moments like this? They are jettisoned out, left to the scorn of those they'd obnoxiously reprimanded. And you can bet your bottom dollar Alec Barnes will get his eventually. Reality has a way of compressing our egos. After the meeting had finished and the charge nurse had assigned our patient loads for the days, I set out to complete my daily tasks. Within the confines of our 25-bed unit, our patients mostly consisted of those recovering from injury, whether accidental or purposefully inflicted, and most patients were more of a danger to themselves than others. That being said, there were always those we had to be wary of. In my years as a psychiatric nurse, I'd been kicked, scratched, bitten, punched, and for the better half of a day, verbally threatened. Still, I never let it sodden my spirits, no matter how much saliva or curses were hawked at me. Contrary to how social media or cinematic horrors may portray them, psychiatric wards are not twisted places littered with crazies. They are places of healing, of alleviation, a haven for those physically alive but internally tormented. Yes, some kicked and shrieked in the halls until their throats split, but a good deal held a much quieter, unseen pain. That was why I was there, to help ease the cold tears of their futures. And for the case of our newest arrival, Roland Boole would become my next big project. It was raining on the night they brought him in. I spied him rolling by on a stretcher, his cold face wet and dripping, his eyes flickered with transient consciousness, perhaps barely grasping the shapes and sounds around him. For a moment, we actually held each other's gaze as he was whisked away to the intensive care unit. 10 paper clips, 8 marbles, and 5 drywall nails. These were the objects removed from Mr. Boole's stomach. He was diagnosed with pica, an uncommon disorder in which one has the urge to ingest inedible objects, though one this severe was especially rare. Encompassing that fact, he'd also been diagnosed with depressive disorder, severe anxiety, and post-traumatic stress. Despite my history in the psychiatric field, I could not help but feel woefully unprepared for him, if only I had even the slightest clue. I stopped at Mr. Boole's door, surveyed my notes once more, and carefully let myself inside. The room was reminiscent of a college dorm, with a single window providing a glossy view of the parking lot. Mr. Boole was awake and currently hunched over his table, a wilderness of hanging, stringy hair covering his face. His legs were crossed at the ankles, both shoelaces removed. He appeared to be writing vigorously into a crossword puzzle with one of our rubber ballpoint pens. I knocked lightly towards the door, which prompted him to turn toward me. "Good morning, Mr. Boole. I smiled as I introduced myself. How are you doing today? From out of the mesh of hair, a thin face stared back at me, giving a look I'd describe only as a tight-lipped vacancy. Eyes wide as possible, but not quite focused. He appeared somewhere north of his 50s. From across his chin and up his cheeks, a scattering of scars was etched into his features. Possible self-harm, my thoughts mused. I continued my greeting. My name is Jason, and I'm one of the registered nurses here to ensure everything is all right and that your time with us is a good one. Is there anything I can help you with? His eyes held tired water behind them, inspecting me up and down, trying to get a read on me as I was him. His mouth then pulled into a small grin, which rumpled the stretch marks. You have piano fingers. I'm sorry? I asked, caught off guard by his statement. He lifted his hand and flexed his fingers. Piano fingers. Father had them too. He used to play all the time in his office, mostly the Gymnopédies and a tad of Chopin. Do you play at all? Despite his craggy appearance, his voice carried a genuine playfulness behind it. Not at all, I chuckled. My mother had one of her friends give me lessons when I was younger, but unfortunately, none of them stuck. Yes, Mrs. Brown was an avid teacher of the arts, but now I can only remember the reek of bone broth carrying her breath. Anyhow, it was nice officially meeting you. Please don't hesitate to let me know if you need anything. We'll do everything we can to help. Of course, he answered, rubbing a finger along his scar-fringed chin. It was not long before we realized the true extent that Mr. Boole needed to be monitored. From the television room, he'd plucked out the power button, as well as both volume buttons from the remote, and swallowed their small plastic bodies. From his bathroom, he'd twisted the cap off of one of the soap dispensers and negotiated it down his throat. And before we could catch it, he'd already swallowed the Flexipen we'd given him for crosswords. As arrangements were made to have them removed, we mulled over different treatment options for his condition. In most cases, pica was caused by an iron deficiency in the body, leaving it craving something to replenish the lacking minerals. Therefore, we prescribed him an iron supplement. After a few weeks of the dosage, 2 tablets a day, and an iron-rich diet, his pining for non-food items had considerably lessened. I was ecstatic about the progress, thoroughly convinced that before long, his symptoms would be gone entirely. Unfortunately, I would come to find out we were only scratching the surface of Roland Boole. As far as the supplements had taken him, we'd soon discover that his hospital bracelet had gone missing, not so mysteriously. I'd come to find that he stopped taking the tablets completely, hiding them under his tongue only to spit them out later. On top of that, he'd entirely stopped eating anything we provided him. The next evening, I stopped by his room to once again check on him. Roland was yet again seated at his writing desk, his spine stiffly straight and his neck bent towards the window. A tray of food sat on the bed next to him, cold and uneaten. I scooped it up for him. You really should eat something, Mr. Boole, otherwise they'll have us give you a feeding tube. The food is much better, trust me. He didn't acknowledge me, merely holding that gaze toward the grayish smear of asphalt outside. Protests like this weren't out of the ordinary, especially for patients coping with anxiety and severe depression. As I turned to report back on his state, a thin, withered voice crept out of him. It's coming. His lips were shaking. What do you mean? I asked, trying to dissect what he'd just said. What is coming? But it was no use. He'd returned to silence, maintaining the glazed stare out the window. Evidently, our conversation had ended.
Nationwide is so much more than a great insurance company. They're one of America's largest financial services companies.
That same evening, a scream resonated down the halls. It was coming from Mr. Boole's room. I was the first to arrive, quickly bursting through the door and witnessing him flailing in his sheets. His hands clawed and grasped at nothing, while his thick heels kicked helplessly about. Assessing the situation, I tried talking him down first, to calm his nerves behind the frenzied cries. He was unresponsive, lips curled back from his gums and his eyes squirming wildly in their sockets. Then, in a quick motion, his thrashing hands converged and closed around his throat, locking into a death grip. I moved to pry his hands off him, trying to carefully break the chokehold he had on himself. Even with his throat being wrung in his own grip, a pressed scream still squeezed its way out. As his grip started to slacken, the howling was suddenly stopped and replaced by the telltale sign of someone about to retch. Not wanting him to vomit flat on his back, I moved to push his body to the side, all the while looking eagerly towards the doorway to see if more help had arrived. But as I turned back toward him, everything stopped. My heart increased to a dreadful acceleration. I tried to take a breath, but couldn't. There is something so dark and different when an unspeakable shock hits you, like every nerve in your body, every sensory input to the outside world has suddenly been cut. Your voice is too brittle to speak. Your eyes are too afraid to close. Things, perhaps semblances of thoughts, beat desperately toward your brain, only to drown before reaching its surface. It had happened so quickly I could only barely process the ghostly outline of Roland's face or the sudden misshapen lump in his throat. Fingers, long, wet fingers were gleaming between his teeth, reaching outward from the dark, pink depths. They were bruised with blackish, purple colors. Strings of shiny spittle stretched and snapped between their wriggling joints. A pungent, bacterial odor reeked from their gangrene tips. Roland's eyes rolled upward as his body heaved and let out a wretched gargle. The fingers bent forward, curling over his face like a spider on its backside, and began to tug at his jaws, trying to pull them wider. Their jagged, split nails scraped across his chin, his cheeks, his nose, digging grooves into his flesh. The sound of footsteps entering the room brought me back. Another nurse had arrived. I peered once again at Roland's face, coated now in a webwork of fresh, bleeding wheals. No fingers, none at all. Together, the other nurse and I restrained Roland and safely injected him with a dose of B52, 2 milligram Ativan, and 5 milligram Haldol in one needle, 50 milligram Benadryl in the other. With the collective effort of 3 different drugs coursing through his system, the struggles finally ceased. A lot of damage, the other nurse commented, surveying the marks on his face. We should have put him under long before this. I realized then that the help was none other than Alec Barnes, the Weisenheimer. Whatever he said next never reached me. I had already left to get some ointments for Roland's cuts. I didn't sleep well that night, dozing in and out without any hope of catching a dream. Before long, I was awake and standing over the sink of the bathroom, both hands against the porcelain. Amidst the rubble of my thoughts, my brain was scavenging for answers, something that could explain what had transpired. But the answers came up short. There wasn't enough substance to it, not enough material to grasp onto. I could only imagine those fingers, their rotting pores, their twitching knuckles jutting out of a man's mouth, trying to hoist an even larger something out of the tube of his throat. The image made my insides feel wretched and rolled a brief nausea around my belly. Absurd. I snapped back at the disgusting thoughts. Ludicrous. Disgusting. Get a hold of yourself. To give such a thing credence was unacceptable. It was a stressful moment, a fabrication of a rattled mind in a stressful situation. That is the end of the matter. No further discussion required. I gargled some mouthwash, clapped both hands against my cheeks, and returned to bed, repeating the same determined tempo. But when I did finally fall asleep, there was no protecting my dreams. I was back there again, standing in Roland's room while his blurry shape screamed and writhed in the sheets. I tried to restrain him before he could harm himself, only to have my arms reel back on their own and grasp my throat instead, the last wisps of breath pulled out of me. In the pit of my gullet, something begins to move, clawing its way upward. I lurched forward, squeezing my eyes open and closed rapidly, trying to wake myself up. But it was no use. I could only retch desperately as my head flops back and the thing inside my throat forces its arrival. My eye finds the wall just as my shadow spouts a new bouquet of spidery horrors. The next time I saw Roland in person, it was during his supervised access to the outdoor patio. It was to give patients an airy reprieve outside the ward. Flower pots hung from the fence that enclosed the space, along with a wall painted into a mural and a few basketball hoops. Mr. Bull was adamant that I was the one to supervise him that day. The new scratches etched into his face had healed, breaking off into faded fractal patterns. He took a seat at one of the diamond blue benches and sucked in a deep breath of air. Rain's on its way. You can smell it. Well, hopefully not before my drive home, I sighed, catching a whiff of it myself, the freshness just before a storm. He hummed passively, and after a short pause between us, popped the question. You saw it, didn't you? The question sent a jolt up my spine, and, if only for a moment, flashed on my face. He took notice of this, the liveliness in his voice kicking up an octave. You did, didn't you? What are you referring to? I asked, rolling my shoulders back. He leaned against the thermoplastic backrest of the bench. You're scared to admit it. I get it, I do. But neither of us can be so lucky to deny it. My eyes wandered the patio, looking rather self-consciously for anyone else around. We were alone. You're going to have to be more specific for me. I'm not quite following you. His tired, watery eyes focused on me. I had to wait for you to see them before I could say anything. Otherwise, you'd never believe me. I know you wouldn't. Then his split lip curled into a smile. But if you don't listen now, you won't know what you saw, and you'll always be left to wonder. I didn't answer, but perhaps it was the absorbed look on my face that had cued for him to continue. It started with ice, he said, pausing as if to mull over that fact. I loved the texture of it, the feeling of crunching it between my teeth in tiny, crackling bits. It was one of the few things that could quell my anxiety, and when that wasn't enough, I turned to chewing on paint chips and sucking on coins for a good while. I was a very anxious boy, you see. A gust of wind whistled through the fence and bobbed the hanging flowers. His tongue lapped between his lips. I grew up in a wealthy home with wealthy parents. One of them as sweet as can be, while the other was emotionally aloof. Can you guess which one father was? He asked with a grin. The stereotypical provider, who considered the financial support to our family enough of a bond between us. Naturally, we weren't very close, and as my tendencies intensified, he and Mother were thoroughly convinced it was merely a phase. Don't ask me why it wasn't. I couldn't tell you. All I knew was that my cravings for the indigestible only grew worse as I got older. I stayed silent and listened, not daring to say anything else to throw him off point. I felt a responsibility to understand him. He'd finally opened up, no longer disappearing behind that flat stare out the window. Answers were best found during the low tide, after all. Surprisingly enough, I wasn't the only one with compulsions in our household. Roland chuckled. Father was a collector, not for coins or old dusty vinyl. He dabbed in other things. A canteen once slung over the shoulder of a dead soldier, a worn noose used to break necks in the 19th century, even an ancient skull with half its dome cleaved by some horrible means of torture. These were the things that interested him, much to my mother's dismay. Little pieces of the dark he enjoyed finding. I'm not even sure where he got his antique piano, but I know that every so often, I'd hear the same two keys get struck in the middle of the night. So, one day, while he and Mother were away on a business trip, I'd snuck into his studio to look at the private collection myself. One of them caught my eye, a piece of jewelry that once belonged to a dead woman, said to have cursed her with an early death. I felt drawn to it, like an impulse had compelled me to believe that somehow it was mine, that it belonged to me. So, I swallowed it. A look of distress crossed him. I was scared that night, absolutely petrified that he'd come back to find the ring missing out of his collection. Then, the following night, it had passed through me. I fished it out of my waist, cleaned it intensely, and returned it back to the collection unharmed. My father was none the wiser. Soon enough, I did it again, this time with the bone of a black cat used in a witch's hex. It had started to feel like a game, but soon became more of a ritual between us. He'd bring something home, I'd swallow it, even if it was just a piece of it, wash off the blood and stool as I passed it, and place it back there. Sure, there may have been some pain and slight discoloring here and there, but never enough for him to notice. It felt good. Celestial, even. Father and I finally found something in common. We both had a liking for objects. His face then fell, becoming ghostly stoic as his voice lost its shape. When it came time for me to move out and on with my life, I had to put an end to our little game. He never did find out what I'd been doing to his collection, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I'd managed, or so I thought, to wean myself off of them, but as time passed, I began to have strange thoughts about all those cursed, haunted things, like how they felt suddenly different in my hands after I passed them. Almost like the energy they once held was no longer there, like it had been left behind somewhere inside me. And what if all that energy, or whatever it was they had, was then left to brew and ferment over the years, until it gestated into something else? He rubbed a pale hand over his cheek, something that finally wants out. As his voice finally trailed off into silence, I spoke up. What do you mean by wants out, exactly? The glaze over his eyes had returned. I'd like to go back inside now, please. That was the last and longest conversation we ever had together, and he was done sharing that day. I tried to stray my thoughts away from that conversation. It was too much to digest. For the rest of that day, I no longer felt like myself inside the ward. Almost like the weight there had become too crushing, like something were about to crest over the rise, and all I could do was brace for an impact I couldn't see. What happened next occurred on a late Sunday evening, 3 days after Roland Bull's unshakable silence. I was making my usual rounds in the ward and stopped by to check on him. I knocked 3 times, opened his door, and stepped routinely inside. Roland was not in his bed or stationed at his usual spot at the writing desk. The door to his bathroom was inch slightly open, the sound of a sink running coming from inside. Hey, Mr. Bull, just here to check on you. Is everything all right? I called. There was no answer. Mr. Bull, are you all right? Still nothing. Only the steady drawl of running water. Without warning, the bathroom door swung open, rebounding off the rubber stop and then rebounding again off Roland Bull's body. He had blundered out backwards on his heels, both hands locked around his neck. His face was flushed into a darkish plum color. Heaps of foam dribbled out of his mouth, rolling over his lips, which had gone blue. Tears streamed out of his eyes, which bulged from their sockets. A single sound emerged from him, the gargled note of air trapped in his throat. Choking! My thoughts screamed. He's choking! I grabbed him, spinning his body around as both of my arms locked around his waist. Never in my life had I performed the Heimlich, but in that moment, it was do or die. I pressed hard into his abdomen with a quick upward thrust, practically lifting him off his feet. His body jerked back, but there was no luck dislodging whatever was inside his throat. The door opened. Someone else had heard the commotion. I looked feverishly toward them while administering another ineffective thrust. The other person was none other than Alec Barnes. Even amid a panic, I despised his presence there greatly. "What's wrong? What's happening?" he asked, which only infuriated me. "Choking!" I snapped, yanking Mr. Bull back yet again. Hot blood coursed through my arms. I forced down a swallow, trying to wet my dry mouth. But in that same moment, with both my arms fastened around him, I had felt something peculiar. A sudden shift of his insides, an almost tumbling motion, far too pronounced to ignore. The Weisenheimer stepped back into my peripheral. "Let me do it. I've got it!" I hissed at him, hoisting Mr. Bull's body upward again, harder than I ever thought I could. His chest heaved as more strained gasps came out of it. Bits of his spittle slopped over my arms. He then lurched forward in my grasp. It felt as though his insides had all decompressed at once, like an airtight container being popped off. His throat opened. He let out a watery scream of pain and retching. Somewhere near us, Alec made a noise, something that sounded like, "Oh God, dear God!" Something heavy hit the floor. Roland Bull went limp in my arms. Alec Barnes let out a scream. Frantic movement skittered around the room like the sound of a fish flopping about a deck, followed by something being torn out of a wall. My eyes raced around, but the slew of everything at once had sucked all the blood from my brain, flushing its data. I checked on Roland, who had slumped over like a puppet in my arms. He was unresponsive, with his eyes staring blankly forward and lips hanging loosely open. I checked for his pulse and found no rhythm. Lying him on the ground, I lined both hands on top of the other and pumped until the strings in my wrists burned. Then I pinched his nose and forced air down his windpipe. It wasn't working. As I did this, my eyes traced the floor, following the thin film of blood and bile that trailed away from us. First to the bathroom, and then to the vanity, where the air vent below it now hung open. The right side of its grill pulled entirely out of place.
Uncompromising energy deserves uncompromising quality, crafted without compromise.
For welders who demand more, Vulcan delivers. With advanced inverter technology,
Alec Barnes was frozen in his spot. The shock that distorted his face was almost too vivid to be real, and even as more staff arrived, he still remained there, stricken with fear. Roland Bull was pronounced dead by our medical examiner. The manner of death, an esophageal rupture. Several tears had perforated the walls of his throat, along with a dislocated jaw, entirely unhinged from his skull. We weren't yet sure what caused the rupture, as nothing could be traced other than the aftermath of ruined tissue. Rumors had floated around between staff of possible causes, but did not hold much water to them. Truth be told, not many of us knew how to handle the loss of a patient not otherwise terminal. As for what came of Alex Barnes, he'd quit spontaneously and left without further notice. Tried as I did to pry information out of him, he dismissed me, shaking his head and repeating that he'd seen nothing. End of story. I could see the panic in his eyes, held back by two thin sacs threatening to tear at any moment. Not a single particle of self-importance left. Perhaps I've even felt the same way, that perhaps I did catch a glimpse of something that day, a gray sleek of a shape pulling itself through the opened air duct, membranous, slug-like. But I must avert those thoughts, sort them out properly, dissect them one by one. That is the only way I can keep myself together. Yet, despite all these, the strangeness around our ward has continued to circulate. Patients have been claiming to hear something in the walls. Even some of our staff have reported it as well. A quick, insipid scratching coming from the ducts, to the point where they believe an animal is trapped in there. As many times as we've had the vents checked, there is no proof for such a claim. I've heard it myself from time to time, sometimes even awfully close by, just on the other side of the duct's cover. But I do not peer inside. I do not even risk what I may see. The source of the noises. the ward's newest arrival.
Before we get into today's stories, I want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, ZocDoc. A lot of the stories I cover start with something small, like a feeling you brush off, or a detail you tell yourself isn't important. And honestly, that's not too different from how a lot of us treat our own health, like a weird pain or just the mental stress of knowing you probably should see a doctor, but putting it off anyway. I caught myself doing the same thing, telling myself I'd deal with it tomorrow. That's when I used ZocDoc, and it actually made the whole process painless. ZocDoc is a free website that lets you search for in-network doctors, compare them by specialty, see real appointment availability, and book instantly. In many cases, you can get in within just a couple of days. You can read verified patient reviews, check out doctor profiles, and choose someone you're genuinely comfortable with no awkward phone calls. What I loved was being able to find a doctor who had next-day availability and reviews that specifically mentioned listening and taking patients seriously. That matters because walking into an appointment already feels stressful enough. So if you've been avoiding a doctor's visit or just want an easier way to find someone you actually trust, head over to ZocDoc.com/Mr. Nightmare and see what's available in your area. It only takes a few clicks. I went camping alone last winter with my dog Roscoe, and it's something I'll never do again. I had taken a few days off work and wanted to get away from people. I loaded my truck with my gear and drove up a long, narrow trail that cut deep into a state forest. The road was barely maintained, covered in packed snow and ice, and there were no other cars anywhere. After driving for almost an hour, I parked at a small pull-off that looked like it hadn't been used in a long time. From there, I hiked another 20 minutes with my pack and Roscoe until I reached a small clearing surrounded by thick trees. The snow was deep and untouched. There were no footprints or signs of anyone else being around recently. That was what I wanted. I set my pack down, cleared a spot for a tent, and let Roscoe wander around while I worked. He stayed close, sniffing the snow in the trees and just jumping around playing. I pitched the tent, staked it down hard because the ground was frozen, and laid out my sleeping pad and winter-rated sleeping bag inside. I knew it was going to be a cold night, well below freezing, so I layered properly. Thermal base layers, thick socks, a fleece, and a heavy jacket stayed on even after camp was set. Once the tent was ready, I gathered dead wood and built a small fire pit. I started a fire and let it burn down until I had a steady flame. I cooked dinner over it, just a simple meal, and sat on a log eating while Roscoe lay near the fire. The woods were quiet in that deep winter way where sound feels almost non-existent. I learned a long time ago from my dad that snow actually absorbs sound. After I ate, Roscoe suddenly stood up and started barking toward the trees. It didn't concern me at first. Deer were everywhere out there, and he had barked at them before. I told him to relax, and he did after a minute, sitting back down. I checked the time and decided I'd stay up a bit longer by the fire before turning in. I always carried a handgun when camping in remote places, and it was holstered at my side like it always was. I felt fine at that point. About 20 minutes later, Roscoe started barking again, louder this time. Then I heard it too, footsteps moving through the snow somewhere out in the woods.
When a child is in the hospital, visitors come to say hello. And when visiting hours are over, they leave. But family does whatever it takes to stay. At Ronald McDonald House, we believe families shouldn't have to fight alone, so we make sure they have everything they need with a community of support, warm meals, and a place to rest. Because when a child is sick, family stays, and Ronald McDonald House stays with them. Donate today at ronaldmcdonaldhouse.org.
I stood up and listened. The steps stopped, then started again. Roscoe went from barking to growling, then suddenly went silent. He stood staring straight ahead toward the trees. That was when I felt uneasy. I followed his gaze and saw a shape at the edge of the tree line. Someone was standing there, half hidden in the darkness, just barely lit by the fire. I called out, saying that he scared me, and telling Roscoe it was okay. The figure didn't move at first. Then he stepped forward slightly, enough for me to see that it was a man. He asked what I was doing out there, that deep in the woods. His tone wasn't friendly. I told him I was just getting out into nature with my dog. He didn't respond right away. He just stood there watching me. I could feel the situation turning wrong. I told him calmly that I was armed. The man slightly laughed and said something about me threatening him instead of inviting him to join me, and asked where my hospitality was. Then he turned and walked back into the darkness, his footsteps fading into the woods. I stood there for a long time after that, staring at the trees. Roscoe stayed close to me. I didn't like any of it, but eventually I told myself he was gone. I put out the fire carefully, throwing snow on it and stirring the ashes until there was nothing left that could glow. I didn't want light drawing attention. I crawled into my tent and sealed it up. Inside, I did everything I could to stay warm. I laid my sleeping pad down to keep the cold ground from draining heat from my body. I stayed fully dressed, pulled on a knit hat, and cinched my sleeping bag tight around my shoulders. I kept a hand warmer near my core and another near my feet. Roscoe curled up next to me, his body heat helping more than anything. I lay there listening to the woods, or rather, the extreme silence. After a while, Roscoe started growling again. Then I heard what he was growling at. Footsteps in the snow. They stopped and Roscoe quieted, but his ears were still perked up. Then the footsteps started again, closer this time, and slower than before. They came right up to the tent and stopped. Roscoe began howling loudly. I whispered for him to stop, terrified of drawing attention. When he did stop, he went back to growling. Whoever it was just stood outside the tent. I could hear subtle movement, like the shift of weight in the snow. I had my gun in my hand now, but I didn't want to make threats. I didn't want to be forced to follow through with the threats. I've never actually shot anyone, and I don't think I have it in me to kill someone even in self-defense. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I cocked the gun and said clearly that I had a gun and that whoever was there needed to leave now. But realistically, who else could it have been besides that creepy guy from before? There was silence for a few seconds. Then I heard footsteps again, moving away from the tent. Slowly at first, then faster, before disappearing into the woods. I didn't unzip the tent to look out. I stayed frozen for hours. Roscoe stayed alert the entire time, which was the only reason I even felt remotely comfortable eventually nodding off. I certainly wouldn't have if I were alone. I barely slept, drifting off only in short bursts. When the sky finally began to lighten, I packed up as fast as I could at the crack of dawn. We hiked back to my truck and drove away. I never went back to that part of the woods again, and I never will. Creeps like that guy really make life scary sometimes, and remind you that you can never really let your guard down. July 4th weekend in 2025. I drove from Melbourne, Florida to Charleston, South Carolina to visit a good friend named Mark I hadn't seen in years. He was there on an internship for his law program and staying in a house in the city. I was visiting for the weekend and spending the night downstairs on a couch by some windows. After a smooth drive, I arrived in Charleston, and we played some pickleball before nightfall. When the night settled in, I went back downstairs to the couch by the windows that faced another apartment building and a small labyrinth of alleyways with an abandoned house across the street. The next day, after playing more pickleball in the morning and hanging out, we went to the main Charleston market. We walked through it and eventually came out near the docks by the water. That's when we saw him. A man in a wedding suit was shambling down the road near the water. He wore a crisp bow tie and clean dress shoes, and his suit looked freshly pressed. He had long black curly hair and a tan complexion. The market behind us was loud and busy, yet this man moved alone across the street with a slow, detached movement. He didn't notice us and seemed to be in his own world. If we crossed the street, we would have walked straight into him. Instinctively, I wanted to avoid him. I grabbed Mark by the arm and told him we were not crossing. We walked to the right, deeper into the city, and picked up our pace. He was moving slowly, so we created distance easily. I told Mark it was strange and that the guy didn't look homeless. His clothes were too clean, too crisp. Something about him felt wrong. Mark agreed. We kept walking for a while. A few streets later, on another busy stretch of Charleston, we looked toward a shop and saw him again. That same man, with the same shambling movement. He was far down the street, diagonal to us, moving at the same slow pace. Somehow, he caught up to us, even though there was no clear way he could have reached that spot without us seeing him. I pointed him out to Mark, and we both stared. It made no sense. He was in a completely different part of the city, but moving exactly the same way. We pushed it aside and kept exploring Charleston. The next day was July 4th, and that night we watched the fireworks on an island about 20 minutes from the city. By then, we had mostly forgotten about the man in the suit. We assumed he was just some strange person wandering around, but something about him set off alarm bells. It felt out of place, wrong. That night, we decided to go on a ghost tour, which we had already planned before the trip. It was my last night in Charleston on July 5th, and the city was packed. It was a busy Saturday night with crowds everywhere, lights pouring from restaurants, and that historical atmosphere Charleston has after sunset. We finished the ghost tour and walked through the main area of the city, filled with restaurants and nightlife. The street was crowded, and a particular wave of people was moving toward us, and quite fast. As this group approached, both Mark and I noticed something at the exact same moment. It was him, the same man in the same wedding suit, with the same bow tie and the same black curly hair, shambling in the middle of the crowd as if he had been placed there. He stood out instantly. His movement was completely different from everyone else. He didn't blend in. No one around him noticed him. Two people were walking right beside him, and he brushed between them without either of them reacting. He kept the same slow, unsettling pace while the entire crowd moved normally around him. He glanced at us for a brief second, and then continued forward. It was as if he was tied to the movement of the crowd without truly being part of it. Mark and I looked at each other in shock. It made no sense. He didn't belong there, and something in both of us recognized that immediately. We watched him move down the street until the crowd thinned out. When it did, we saw him clearly, still shambling, still moving at that same unnatural pace, disappearing into a darker side street until he turned a corner. We were quiet, not panicking, but deeply unsettled. The same man in the same suit appearing multiple times in different parts of the city, always shambling, always out of place. Both of us knew something was wrong. Later that night, we returned to the house. Mark went upstairs to his room, and I went downstairs to sleep. I shut the blinds and tried to settle in. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up to a tap on the window. I froze. After a few moments, I forced myself to look. I lifted the blinds slightly and looked down the alley. At the far end, I saw the back of a man turning the corner. It was him again. He moved out of sight, but right before he disappeared, he looked back toward the window. I told Mark the next morning. I explained what I saw, and even he admitted that the entire experience was disturbing. He doesn't believe in anything paranormal, and he's extremely logical and grounded, but even he was shaken. As for me, I'm more spiritually sensitive, and this experience stayed with me, and I also know it's with Mark months later. We'll never forget that weekend. The man in the suit felt real and unreal at the same time. Something about all of it was off. I drove home to Florida on July 6th, and the image of him turning that corner has stayed with me ever since.
Adobe Creative Cloud is designed to be almost like a playground. It's a collection of applications. If you are more like an illustrator or a graphic designer,
I never thought I would be the kind of person who double checks door locks or memorizes the sounds of my own floorboards. But that changed after 1 week last winter. I live alone in a small house I bought a few years ago, and my routine has been boring and predictable. I work from home, order groceries, go to the gym late at night, and I don't talk to my neighbors much at all. That routine is why it took me longer than it should have to realize something was wrong. It started with a noise I heard around 2:30 in the morning on a Tuesday. I was half asleep on the couch with the TV still on low when I heard what sounded like a soft thump near the back of the house. It wasn't loud enough to scare me, and my first thought was that something had fallen in the kitchen or maybe the house had shifted. We all hear sounds like that in the house or apartment once in a while, right? I muted the TV so I could listen. Nothing else happened. I checked the back door, made sure it was locked, and went to bed. The next morning, I noticed the back door felt different when I opened it. The deadbolt still worked, but the handle felt loose, like it had been twisted too hard. I made a mental note to fix it later. That night, I went to the gym around 11 p.m. like I usually do. Side note, I like an empty gym, and I got back around midnight to 12:30. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed my porch light was off, yet I always leave it on. I stood there in my car for a few seconds trying to remember if I had turned it off earlier, and I convinced myself I probably did. Inside, everything looked normal. I walked through every room just doing an innocent little analysis before going to bed, something I had never done before. On Thursday morning, I woke up to my alarm and noticed my phone was at 12% battery. I always charge it overnight, and I clearly remembered plugging it in. The cable was still connected to my phone, but the charger was no longer connected to the outlet. Weird. I told myself I must have knocked it loose in my sleep, but that explanation didn't really make sense because my phone was still on the nightstand, not in bed with me. At that moment, my only explanation was I picked up my phone in the middle of the night, accidentally yanked it off the outlet without realizing, and set it back down. I started paying closer attention after that. That night, I stayed up later than usual, sitting in the dark with the TV off, just listening. Around 3 in the morning, I heard slow thumps coming from the back of the house. Footsteps? I asked myself. Nah, it can't be. I held my breath, but the thumps seemingly stopped. After a while, I convinced myself the thumps came from outside. I'm in the suburbs, there's of course other people around, even at night. The next day, I found muddy shoe prints on the floor near the back door. The thing is, though, the footprints weren't clear. Like I couldn't distinctly make out patterns of the bottoms of the shoes, which made it look like someone tried to wipe them off before walking around. My stomach literally skipped a beat. I stood there staring at them, trying to understand how they got there. I hadn't had anyone over. I hadn't gone outside in muddy shoes. I checked the back door again, and this time I noticed faint scratch marks around the lock, like someone had used something thin to pry at it. I called the locksmith and told him I thought my lock was failing. I didn't say anything about the footprints. He replaced the lock that afternoon and told me everything should be fine. That night, I pushed a chair under the back door handle and slept with my bedroom door locked, something I never did before then. I woke up just before 4 in the morning to the sound of something tapping lightly on my bedroom door. It wasn't a knock. It sounded like someone testing the door with their fingertips. I stayed completely still, staring at the door, my eyes burning because I refused to blink. The tapping stopped after a minute, and then I heard soft footsteps moving away. I didn't sleep after that. In the morning, the chair was still under the back door, but the back door itself was unlocked. The new lock wasn't damaged, it had just been turned, and that's when reality truly set in. I wasn't just imagining these things like I thought I was because I was tired. Someone had been inside my house while I was asleep and knew how to unlock the door from the inside. I called the police and tried to explain without sounding insane. They checked the house, looked around the yard, and told me there was no sign of forced entry. but yeah, that was kind of obvious given that I changed the lock. They suggested I might have unlocked the door myself without remembering. I knew that wasn't true, but there was nothing they could do either way. That night, I stayed awake with all the lights on and a kitchen knife on the table in front of me. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something from down in the basement. The basement door, which was just outside of the kitchen, was cracked open. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. I stared down the hallway to the cracked open basement door. I walked over to it, peeked down through just what the crack in the door would allow me to see, and I swear it was not my imagination. I saw either at the bottom of the stairs, or maybe one of the bottommost steps, the outline of someone standing there. I don't know if they were looking up or not. When I realized what I was looking at, I slammed the door shut and sprinted out to my car. I sat in my car as I once again called 911. After police showed up a second time, they entered while I waited in one of their cars. They brought him out of the house in handcuffs a few minutes later. He was barefoot and wearing dark clothes that looked like they had been slept in. He didn't look at me once. I just don't think that he noticed me in the back of the car. They put him in the back of the other car and shut the door. I stayed outside while more officers went back in, and I refused to look at the guy in the back of the car. I was actually shaking. Even as I talked to the officers, I was stuttering in shock. It took longer than I expected for them to finish the rest of their search. When one of the officers finally came out, he asked how long I had lived there. I told him a few years. He nodded and wrote something down. He asked what time I usually went to the gym and which nights. I told him. He looked back at the house and told me they found food wrappers and bottled water behind the furnace in the basement, along with a phone charger plugged into an outlet down there. He said it looked like someone had been sleeping on the concrete using old insulation as padding. The man hadn't spoken a word to the officers. The main officer I was talking to told me the likely charges the man would be facing, but that ultimately it would be up to the district attorney. Eventually, they told me I could go back inside. It was days later that I was going through my camera roll to send my friend something, when I found a very, very disturbing picture. At first, I had to process how a picture like this could be taken. It was a picture of me, in my bed, sleeping, taken at 3:11 a.m. It was the same night that I woke up in the morning to my phone being unplugged from the wall outlet. The nightmare became real all over again. I contacted the unit listed on the incident report, and they asked me to come in to digitally transfer the photo for supplemental evidence. I was told that with this photo, he'd likely be facing additional charges such as stalking or even being registered as a sex offender for life. All good things to hear. It doesn't save me, however, from the trauma I'll forever have to live with thinking back to this shit. I'll never be able to go down into a basement alone at night again in my life.
Nationwide is so much more than a great insurance company. They're one of America's largest financial services companies. Like how I'm more than Saquon Barkley, the NFL's reigning leading rusher. I'm also
I worked the night shift at a medium-sized hotel in my town. The main thing I did at my job was stand at the front counter and attend to customers that needed to check in or out. For the most part, though, barely anyone would be going in or out of the lobby during the night, and when they did, they would just pass by. So pretty much I just stood there all night, staring at the doors. Anyways, I would get the usual angry customers complaining about something or just being weird, but there was one night in particular that still stands out to me. It was a normal night, just like any other, as I stood at the front desk. There was a pretty big storm going on outside though, and usually whenever it's raining or just bad weather in general, nobody would be going in or out of the hotel. I pulled my phone out to pass the time, but a few minutes later a man showed up at the entrance door. He walks through the first set of doors, and then stops, standing in the small area between the two sets of doors. He gazes through the glass, looking around the inside of the building, then makes quick eye contact with me, before awkwardly patting down his pockets and walking back out into the rain. It was pretty weird, but to be honest, I'd worked at a hotel long enough, and met so many people that I was used to the strange and awkward behavior. I assumed he just forgot his keys or something, and had to get it back from his car. However, I should mention that I'd never seen this man before, though not uncommon due to most customers checking in or out during the day. Plus, he didn't have a suitcase or a bag or anything, so of course I just assumed he already had a room and everything. Another few minutes went by, before the phone rang on my desk. The caller ID said it was an outside number, so I knew it wasn't anyone from one of the rooms. I picked it up and said the regular hotel introduction and asked how I could help. A man was on the other line and said that he had parked in the front lot and needed help bringing in his luggage. Sorry, all of our bellmen left at 9 p.m. He responded, politely saying that it was okay, but then he asked me if I could come out and help him, assuring me that he just needed me to roll in a small suitcase. This was a pretty strange request, but I told him that if he pulled his car up to the front door, then I could help him get situated. He paused for a moment, and then said okay and hung up. A little bit annoyed, I walked around the desk and waited in between the entrance doors. I stood there for probably 5 minutes before getting impatient. I opened the door and stuck my head outside. It was still pouring, but I could see the man from earlier across the parking lot waving to me and motioning for me to come over. I got a really bad feeling, as the whole reason I wanted him to pull up to the front was so that we could be out of the rain. Why would someone want to walk with their luggage through a storm? I ignored him and closed the door, making my way back to my desk, figuring that if he really needed my help, then he'd pull his car up to the front. As soon as I sat down, though, the man came through the doors. From how far he was in the parking lot, he had to have sprinted to get here that quickly. This time, he came all the way into the lobby and stood a few feet from the desk, breathing heavily. He immediately asked me the same exact question he asked me over the phone, asking to help him with his small suitcase. Of course, I responded with my same exact response, that he needed to pull the car up to the front. This time, though, he told me that he had already taken the luggage out of his car and didn't want to put him back in. I already had a bad feeling about this guy, but that response made me sure that there was something seriously wrong. I asked him if he had a room, assuring him that I needed to check him in before assisting him any further. He immediately grew angry, as if I offended him with that question. He demanded that I come out and help him before he checks in, as his luggage was getting wet outside. At this point, I'd had enough and responded with a bit of an attitude. You shouldn't have left your bags outside in the rain to begin with. If you refuse to check in, then I'm gonna have to make you leave. He angrily turned around, giving me the middle finger on his way out of the door. He didn't come in for the rest of the night, and when the morning crew came in, I told them about the man. As far as I know, he never checked in. This definitely got me creeped out, as I knew now that he wasn't even a customer of the hotel, and was just some random guy trying to lure me into his car in the middle of a stormy night.
This holiday, Verizon is giving you incredible gifts and savings you'll enjoy all year. When you switch, you'll get 4 new iPhone 17 Pros. No trade-in needed. That's right. Get 4 lines for just $25 a line and the amazing iPhone 17 Pro for everyone. Save big this holiday. Visit Verizon today. $20 monthly promo credits applied to account over 35 months with a new line on unlimited welcome. In times of congestion, unlimited 5G and 4G LTE may be temporarily slower than other traffic. Domestic data roaming at 2G speeds. Additional terms apply for phone offer. See Verizon.com for details.
I don't take road trips very often, as I prefer taking a plane if I have to go anywhere far. But due to the short notice of a family member's funeral, I had to drive about 10 hours to my cousin's house. I wasn't entirely sure how long I'd be away, so I packed enough stuff to last a week and began my drive the following morning, around 10 a.m. It had probably been 5 or 6 years since I'd driven this far, but I was still confident that I could make it there in one day without needing to stop at a hotel or anything. A couple hours into the drive, a storm cloud started forming ahead, and an hour later, I was driving through heavy rain and thunder. The roads I was driving on were long and went through plain fields and sometimes small forests. Some portions of the road were in a valley, so all of the water from the rain would flow down onto the road with basically no drainage system. This made me have to slow down drastically to ensure that I didn't slide off the side or get caught in a flooded portion of the road. At one point, I couldn't even cross through due to the path being completely flooded. I couldn't risk my car breaking down or getting stuck in the middle of nowhere on an empty road, so I was forced to turn around and find a different route. All of this caused the drive to take much longer than I had planned, and after almost 8 hours of driving, I still had 5 hours to go. The sun was already setting, and I was pretty exhausted from having to focus so much on driving in the rain, so I knew I needed to find somewhere to get some rest before continuing the drive. It took 45 minutes of trying my hardest to stay awake before I found a small town where I could pull over. By small town, I mean it literally had maybe 20 buildings in it, and a few random farmhouses scattered around miles away. I drove around to see if there was a motel or anything, but of course it didn't have one. The best place I could find was a small parking lot to a local grocery store, so I parked my car in the far corner. The town was quiet, as in the fact that none of the lights were on, other than a few street lights, and no cars were on the roads. The place was a little creepy, so I made sure to lock my car and look around for a few minutes before I leaned my seat back and closed my eyes. I know it seems like this was a bad idea, and that I really should have known better, but it was pretty late, and the rain was still coming down really hard, so I wasn't too worried at the time about anything happening during the night. Anyways, it felt safer than just parking on the side of an empty road with no help around if I needed it. 10 minutes later, I fell asleep to the sound of the heavy rain on my car. When I woke up, I noticed the thunder and lightning had gotten louder. Looking around, the whole parking lot was much darker than it had been when I got there. But in the distance, I could make out a figure moving towards my car. I stared at them, waiting for them to make a turn or go somewhere else, but the further they walked, it became clear that they were heading for me. The rain made it difficult to see, but once they were 20 feet away, I could tell it was a man. I started getting really creeped out, especially since it was pouring outside, and this guy didn't seem bothered by it at all. But I could tell he wasn't holding anything, so I was pretty confident that he couldn't just break into my car. Once he was just a few feet away, he started walking towards the back door. Then, rather than trying to open them or break in, he put his hands flat on the door and started pushing, as if he were trying to literally push my entire car. I didn't know what to think, but the fact that he was trying to push my car told me that this man was definitely crazy. I put my key in the ignition and started it up, turning on the headlights and everything as to warn the guy that I was there, but the man didn't even flinch. He continued, trying to push as if his life depended on it. I had had enough at this point, and slowly started backing out. The man followed the car back for a couple of steps, keeping his hands on it before letting go. He stood and watched me as I pulled away and began leaving the lot, before he started walking back in the same direction that he came. I didn't stop the rest of the way to my cousin's house.
Some people just don't get it, that Squarespace isn't just for websites. You can get a domain from Squarespace too. It's kind of like how your parents don't get how you make a living off your art, but you do. And with a domain like existentialglitter.com and a website from Squarespace, you can build a brand for yourself, grow your client list, and continue to confuse your parents all in one place. Get yours before it's gone with offer code MAKEITREAL for 10% off your domain or website. Terms and conditions apply.
I live in Washington State, and at the time that this happened, I lived with my parents in our small remote house. It was about 20 minutes from the nearest town, and our neighbors were half a mile in each direction. This isn't uncommon here, as it's mostly vast forest landscape all throughout, with small towns here and there, and a couple of big cities. Anyways, I'd grown up in that house my whole life, and was used to the isolated nature of it, so it never really made me nervous or anything. But this one incident that happened when I was 14 made me terrified of our location. It was spring break, and my parents had planned a trip to Florida, and we were supposed to leave for the airport on Sunday morning. However, there was a complication at my dad's work that happened a couple days before, so unfortunately we had to cancel the trip. To make up for it, my parents took me to a water park on Sunday. It was fun, but I was still upset that the trip had to be canceled. We were there for maybe 4 or 5 hours before a strong storm cloud was seen heading our way. It was coming in quick, so pretty much everyone at the pool started packing and getting out of there. By the time we got home, the storm had completely come down on us. The rain was intense, and the thunder and lightning was frequent. But this is where things started to get strange. We pulled into the driveway and immediately noticed that the garage was wide open. My dad assumed that he had just forgotten to close it, or maybe the sensor got caught on something on the way down and stopped it. But my mom says she was sure that she saw it close fully on her way out. There didn't seem to be anything else unusual though, so we all got out and made our way inside. My mom pressed the button to close the garage, and it closed without any issues. My parents both went to the couch and turned on the TV, while I made my way upstairs to my room. The rain was coming down even harder at this point, filling the whole house with that loud rumbling sound. But halfway up the stairs, I swear I heard something moving in the hallway. I quickly continued up, trying to see if there was an animal or something, but nothing was there. What I did notice, though, was that my bedroom lights were on. This was pretty weird, as I knew that I hadn't even turned them on at all today, and I definitely wouldn't have left them on if I did. At this point, I wasn't really sure what to think. I thought that I had to have just forgotten about the lights, or maybe something weird happened with the wiring and they turned on. I don't know. I was still a little scared though, so I stood in the hallway for a bit before making my way over to the door. Standing right outside my room, I listened, trying to make sure it was safe before entering. A few moments of silence go by before I hear something shuffling around. It was very faint and quiet though, as if it were a small rodent moving between boxes. I cracked the door open, figuring I was going to see a rat or something running around, but I didn't see anything at first glance. I entered and closed the door behind me. My room actually looked completely normal and untouched. Usually when an animal or something gets in the house, there's clear signs of a mess being made by them. I got down on my knees and looked under the bed and on the floor for any signs of an animal, but again, there was nothing. I got up and sat on my bed, just thinking about how strange this all was. But as I sat there collecting my thoughts, a shadow quickly moved across the bottom of my bedroom door from out in the hallway. My heart stopped for a moment, terrified, as I could tell by the size of the shadow that it was definitely a person. I instantly stood up from my bed, trying to think of what to do, as I was pretty much trapped in my room unless I wanted to risk running out. I picked up my phone and texted my dad that someone else was upstairs. Almost immediately, the message showed that it was read, and I could hear him quickly coming up the stairs. I stood by my door nervously as I listened to the footsteps getting closer, expecting someone to jump him, but after a few seconds he opened my door. He looks at me with concern, and I quickly whisper to him what I saw. I think he could sense the fear in my voice, and we both made our way down the hall and back downstairs. Just as we got to the bottom of the steps, a single loud thud came from upstairs, followed by hard-running footsteps down the hall. We ran into the living room, where my dad picked up a small bat he had laying in the corner. But the footsteps were heard sprinting down the steps, followed by the front door swinging open. We turned the corner and looked at the door, wide open, with a man in the distance running away. My dad called 911, and they came almost 30 minutes later due to the location of our house. They talked with my parents and even asked me a few questions, then searched around for a little bit before leaving. As far as I know, they never found the guy, but the general idea of why it happened was because someone knew that we were supposed to leave for vacation on Sunday morning. This is pretty unnerving, as it means that it's very likely that the person who broke into our house is someone our family knows and talks to. It really makes you wonder who your true friends are. I used to work at my dad's restaurant when I was in my later teen years. It was just a regular local place, but was open until 2 a.m. every night. During high school, I would only work after school until 8, but once I graduated, I started working the closing shifts to save up money for college. The restaurant would be surprisingly busy at night, all the way up until closing. Mostly it was just people picking up online orders, but sometimes groups of friends would come in and hang out at one of the tables while they ate. I definitely preferred working at night though, as I would be the only one there and didn't have to listen to my dad bossing me around. Anyways, after 6 months of working nights, things started to get pretty weird. It was almost closing, around 1:45 a.m., and I was in the back cleaning when I heard the door ring. I finished up what I was doing and made my way to the front counter. There were 2 young men who looked really tired. One of them came up to the counter while the other one stood at one of the tables. "Our dining room is closed for the night, but I can still take a small order if you want it for takeout." The man at the counter just stared at the menu and didn't say anything. I stood there uncomfortably as the man shifted his gaze to behind me, as if he was inspecting the place. A few seconds later, the man by the table quickly walked out and the other guy followed. It was definitely the weirdest encounter I'd probably had, and I couldn't really think of any reasonable explanation. I kind of just assumed that they were planning on robbing me, but then decided otherwise for some reason. The next morning, I told my dad about it, and he said I could start locking the doors at around 1:45 for the next few days. Another week went by with nothing unusual before it happened again. I had a customer picking up an order around 1:30, and almost as soon as he left, one of the men from last week walked in. It was the one that was standing at the table, and I noticed right away that he was wearing the same exact clothing as last time. However, this time he came up to the counter. He looked me in the eyes for a second, and then asked me if I could help him jump-start his car. The way he said it was really creepy, and it was very obvious that there was something else going on here. Sorry, I have to stay in the restaurant during my shift. His face immediately shifted into a frown. He said it would only take a minute, and no one would know that I left. At this point, I knew something was very off, and I started to panic a little bit in my head. He started making his way back to the door, gesturing me to follow him. I honestly wasn't sure what to do, and was really freaking out, but my fight response was starting, and my adrenaline was pumping. It's worth mentioning that I'm not really that big of a guy at all, and this man was much larger than me. Plus, I was pretty confident that the other guy was nearby too, probably ready to jump me if I didn't comply. But I figured I was screwed either way, so I might as well try to fight. I grabbed a pair of scissors we had behind the counter and stood my ground. The man turned around again once he reached the door, and this time he looked angry and demanded that I followed him. At that same instant, a loud bang came from behind me, followed by the back door slamming open. I ran to the back, and as soon as the guy saw me, he bolted right back outside. I turned around quickly and ran back to the front counter, but the other guy had left as well. I obviously called the police afterwards and gave them the security footage, but it was pretty low quality and hard to make out any identity from them. Anyways, I'm still not really sure why they didn't just attack me and rob the place, but my best guess is that they were just trying to rob the store without harming anyone, so as soon as they saw I was gonna fight, they ran. Those two could have easily taken me down and made the situation much worse, so I'm glad it didn't turn out that way. I lived in a small apartment for most of my 20s, as it was all that I could afford since I lived alone. My complex was small and only had 6 total apartments in it. Most of the people living there were older and retired, and kept to themselves. I actually liked the fact that I didn't have to interact with any of them every time that I needed to go in or out of the complex, as I'm usually in a rush or just not in the mood to socialize. Anyways, I lived on the top floor, and the room across from me had an old couple living there for almost 2 years before they moved out. I never talked to them, so I didn't really care, to be honest. But several months go by before someone new moves in, and another 2 weeks went by before I actually met them. I was getting ready for work one morning and preparing my packed lunch when I hear the neighbor's door open. I didn't think much of it until another minute went by, and I realized that I never heard the door close. I finished getting ready and put my shoes on, then opened my door to leave. I immediately noticed that the neighbor's door was still open, and a tall man in his 40s or 50s was standing right outside the door facing me. He smiled and introduced himself. I faked a short smile and told him my name, then said I had to go to work and began walking past him. But as I started down the stairs, he asked me to come in for a little bit and have breakfast with him. This was really weird, as I had just told him that I needed to go to work. But I just said sorry and continued down the stairs and out of the complex. While I was at work that day, I thought about how strange the interaction was. Thankfully, when I got back home, I was able to get into my apartment without any interactions. But the next morning, I woke up to a knock at the front door. I was really annoyed because I had work today and now I was up early, but I quickly got dressed and opened the front door. My neighbor was there, but strangely he was standing right in front of his open door again. He asked me to join him for breakfast again, to which I obviously declined and told him in a more aggressive manner to not knock on my door so early. The man didn't seem very happy about my answer and just kind of stood there. Then he said that I didn't have to leave for work for a while and I had enough time to eat with him. I knew that there was something wrong with this guy, as there was a lot about that response that was creepy. I firmly said no and then backed away and closed my door, making sure to lock it. Again, the more I thought about this guy, the more creepy and disturbing the interactions seemed. The rest of the day went by as usual though, and I got home around 6. I made some dinner and watched a movie, then got ready for bed around 11. I laid in bed for a while, thinking about my creepy neighbor and wondering what to do about it. I decided that if anything else happens, I'd contact the owner of the complex and have him talk to the guy. Then I leaned over and turned off my lamp and tried to fall asleep. But a few minutes later, I heard the neighbor's door creak open. I waited silently, listening to what the guy was doing, but I couldn't hear anything else. Again though, I never heard the door close. I was pretty nervous, unsure of what the man could possibly be doing this late at night. Eventually though, I drifted asleep due to not hearing any further noises for over an hour. I'm not sure how long I slept before a loud knock at the door woke me up. But these knocks didn't come from my front door. They were at my bedroom door. I shot up, completely terrified, and turned on the lights. The only thing I had to defend myself with was a small screwdriver on my nightstand. I grabbed it and stood next to my bed, shaking in fear, before picking up my phone and calling 911. When they arrived at the front door, I quickly got out of my room and opened it. I was surprised the door was even shut, but I told the officers everything and all about my suspicions of the neighbor. Unfortunately, though, there was no real evidence of a break-in, and they couldn't do much at all. I knew what I heard was real, though, and I did not feel safe in my apartment anymore. I called my sister later that day, and she agreed to let me stay at her place for a few days. Those days went by quicker than I hoped, though, and I started driving back to my apartment on Saturday evening. I tried to stay calm, assuring myself that the guy had given up by now, and everything would be okay. I pulled into the parking lot and made my way into the building. The sun had just set, so the staircase was dim. I slowly made my way up, trying to stay quiet as to not let my neighbor know that I was coming up. Once I reached the top, I saw his door was closed and I got a big sense of relief as I quickly made my way through my door and locked it behind me. I dropped my bag in the hallway and turned on the lights as I turned the corner into my living room. I jumped back screaming as the man was sitting right on my couch staring at me with a wide, awful smile. I sprinted out of the entire complex and into my car, then called the police again and waited for them in a nearby parking lot. When they arrived about 10 minutes later, we drove up to the complex and they went into the apartment while I waited by my car. Surprisingly, they came out just a minute later with the man in handcuffs. They said he was still sitting on the couch and that they also found a small knife in his pocket. The most disturbing part of this whole situation, though, was that when he was questioned, he admitted to breaking in 3 separate times, and I only knew about the 2 incidents, which meant that at one point he was hiding in my apartment, probably watching me without me even knowing. I have a little Jack Russell dog named Maggie, and she has a lot of energy, so when we go for walks, it's not uncommon for them to spread to the 2-hour mark. This particular day, I got home from work around 5:30, and the sun doesn't usually set until 6:30 or 7. Almost immediately after walking through the door, I put her leash on and quickly changed, and then we headed out. The walk went as usual, as Maggie just took me in whichever direction she wanted to walk in. Things didn't start to take a turn until about an hour in, when the sun was almost fully down, and unfortunately for me, I had walked further than I'd realized. If you take your dog for long walks, you know how easy it is to zone out, especially if your dog rarely stops to sniff. We had walked in a direction I had taken normally, but the particular street I was on was unfamiliar, but I still knew the general direction home. I started to turn around, but Maggie was standing still, and then she began whimpering softly, and that's when I saw it. Through the soft light of the sunset, I could make out a huge coyote staring at us in the middle of the street. It was roughly the size of a golden retriever, with matted fur, and with its mouth partially opened, you could see its disgusting, sharp, yellow teeth. I knew exactly what it wanted. I picked Maggie up and started walking in the opposite direction. I was a bit fearful, but for some reason I thought it would just go away. I didn't know these streets very well, but what I did know was that I had to keep moving. As I quickly continued, the coyote slowly followed, keeping its distance still. But the darker it got, the more scared I became, and after walking down random neighborhood roads in the darkness for a while, I came to the horrifying realization that I was lost. All the turns had messed with my sense of direction, and I had no idea which way to go. Through the darkness, I could now see the glowing eyes of the beast, and could now hear it yipping and howling. As I walked further through the dark neighborhood streets, every few minutes another set of glowing eyes would appear behind me, and even more, louder howls. I could tell they were getting closer too. I was absolutely terrified at this point, trying to hold back my tears as I was panicking and fearing for both mine and my dog's life. Every once in a while, I'd pass a streetlight and look behind me, revealing the entire pack walking slowly with their heads down, watching my every move. After almost 45 minutes of being followed, I began tiring, and I knew I was far from the safety of my home. Maggie began whimpering louder too, which made me even more emotional as I knew that she was aware of what may soon happen. The howling and yipping became more frequent, growing louder and closer. I looked back one more time to see all of their eyes staring at me from only 30 to 40 feet away. But suddenly and strangely, they all began to separate, moving to the sides of the road. A few moments later, a small car slowly makes its way between the crowd of coyotes and stops right next to me. A lady rolls down her window and asked me if I needed help. I was so thankful for her and told her to please take me home. There are almost no circumstances in which I would willingly get into a stranger's car, but I really had no other choice. The lady was really nice and seemed terrified for me. I was crying at this point, knowing I had just been moments away from a grueling attack. She kindly dropped me off at my house, which was almost 20 minutes from where she picked me up. I live in a nice neighborhood, one where you don't have to worry about your house being broken into or carjackings. The only growing problem in our neighborhood, and many neighboring ones as well, is coyotes. It's been a few years since this incident happened to me, and as time went on, there became more and more showing up around town, getting bigger and stronger. The public knows to be cautious, especially in parks where there are tons of trees and places for them to make homes. Signs were put up letting people know of the popular areas where anywhere between 3 and 20 have been spotted. There have been news stories coming out, such as groups of coyotes leaping over fences and taking small dogs, and larger animals being found torn apart in kids' parks. Very sad stories, and some even a little scary. But you never think of coyotes as being an immediate danger until you're being followed in the middle of the night by a pack of the hungry and merciless. My friend Derek and I were both thrill seekers, and Halloween was the perfect excuse for us to go out and do something scary. We were both 18 at the time, and Halloween was in just a few days. Derek suggested that we go to an abandoned restaurant that was located just a few miles away. I'll admit, it wasn't one of those old, worn-down places, at least not from the outside. It was just a regular restaurant that shut down 3 or 4 years ago, and the property was never bought, so it gathered up garbage and had some broken windows and stuff like that. Anyways, on Halloween night, we packed a small drawstring bag with some flashlights, and then we drove over to the restaurant. We parked on the side of the street, a couple buildings away, and walked towards the front of the place. It definitely looked a lot creepier at night, and I could feel myself starting to get a little nervous. As we approached the door, we noticed a small bike leaning up against the front of the window. I kind of expected other groups of people to come here for the scary experience on Halloween, but I thought it was weird that there was only one bike. Derek tried opening the front door, but of course it was locked, so we made our way around the right side of the restaurant and found a small open side door. We slowly walked in and found ourselves in the kitchen. It was completely trashed, with tons of bottles and cans scattered on the floor. We then turned right and moved into the back room, which had a few chairs and a table, both pretty dirty looking. It was obvious that plenty of people had been here before us, probably using the restaurant as some sort of hideout or something. We were in there for a few minutes, looking around at some of the graffiti on the walls, before we heard something coming from the front of the place. It sounded kind of like a small can rolling on the ground or something. Both of us looked at each other, a little shaken, but I guess that was the whole reason we went there in the first place. We stood there silently, listening for a minute, but we didn't hear anything else. I led the way, walking back through the kitchen and over to the doors that led into the main dining room. I tried to open it quietly, but it made way more noise than I was hoping. Derek followed me as I walked in and looked around the corner. Almost immediately, I noticed a can laying on the ground across the room. The way the dining room was set up, it was basically an L shape, so I could only see part of the room. Most of the tables were pushed over, and the chairs were broken. I was really shocked to see the place like this, as I had always thought it looked like just some regular, unsold, vacant building from the outside. Anyways, I started making my way down the room, and toward the other side, so I could look into the other part of the dining room.
Wait, do you hear that?
Very softly, I could hear what sounded like breathing. It was so quiet, it was hard to tell for sure though. I took a few more slow steps, and then I looked around the corner. I froze, seeing an old man sitting on a chair in front of a table in the back of the dining room. He was staring at the floor, breathing softly and not moving at all. Derek grabbed me and we both rushed out of there and ran back to our car. I was so shaken up, I made Derek drive us back to his house. We spent the rest of Halloween night sitting in his room, just talking about what had happened and what we thought the guy was doing there. It's been a few years now, but every time I think about that situation and see the man sitting there, it still scares the shit out of me. I have no idea what he was doing in that place alone. Halloween has always been one of my favorite holidays ever since I was a kid. I just enjoy the whole idea of spooky season and watching horror movies and everything. Anyways, this happened last year when I was 22 and lived in a small one-story home with my roommate Alex. It was Halloween night, around 9 p.m., and all the kids had pretty much finished trick-or-treating, so I put the candy away and turned off all the lights. Then we both sat down to watch some horror movies. We finished the whole movie, and I had Alex find us another one to watch while I went into the kitchen to grab some snacks. On my way into the kitchen, I thought I saw something move by the sliding glass door that led into the backyard. It startled me for a second, and I walked closer to the door, but I didn't see anything else. So I checked to make sure it was locked, and then I went to grab a bag of popcorn and made my way back to the couch. Just as Alex started the movie, we both heard a thud from the backyard. We looked at each other, then both went to the kitchen and over to the back door. I turned on the back porch light, and then slid the door open and peeked my head out. Our yard was small, and it had a fence around it, so it would have been pretty easy to see if someone was there, but I didn't see anything. We both just assumed it must have been a neighbor, and I closed the door and we continued the movie. At some point midway through, Alex got up to grab some water, and a few seconds later, I heard him whisper to me from the other room.
Dude, someone's here.
I could hear the genuine fear in his voice, and I immediately got a little scared too. I made my way over to him and asked what he saw, and he told me that as soon as he came into the kitchen, he saw a man run past the sliding door from outside. Although still creeped out, I told him it had to be just some stupid Halloween prank. I think part of me was just saying that to try and make myself feel better too, but it didn't work for very long. Only moments later, the front doorbell rang. I led the way, and Alex followed behind me as I walked over to the door and looked out the peephole. I saw a man in a white mask and dark clothing standing on the porch. I could see he was holding a pillowcase too, and it looked pretty full, as if he had a bunch of candy in it. He was just staring at the door, not even moving or looking around. I honestly didn't know what to do, so I let Alex look, and then we both decided to just ignore him and see if he leaves. We waited for a few minutes on the couch, pretty much just sitting in silence, trying to listen for anything. Then I got up and looked again, and the man was gone, but he left his pillowcase on the porch, still full.
Let's just call the cops. Something doesn't feel right about this.
I agreed with him, and we went over to get my phone from the couch, but as I walked through the hallway, I saw the man standing with his mask against the sliding door in our backyard. I yelled for Alex, and we both ran to my bedroom and locked ourselves in. Alex pulled his phone out and called 911 while I moved a dresser in front of the door just in case. We were both freaking out, and I didn't want to take any risks. Only moments later, the guy started banging on our window, and I could hear him trying to open it from the outside. We had only lived there for a few months, and I honestly had no idea if the windows were even locked or not, as neither of us have ever touched them. Alex pulled the curtain back, and the man ran away. Luckily, the windows were locked. We waited in my room for almost 15 minutes before the police showed up. The man had already run off, I guess, but when we let the cops in, we noticed the pillowcase was still on the porch. One of the officers slowly opened it and checked inside. Then he grabbed it and poured it out. It was just a bunch of leaves and small sticks. The officer guessed that it was probably just some trick to try and get us to open the door so he could force his way in. With nothing really to go off of, though, they ended up leaving after taking a quick look around and not seeing anything. We were still shaken by the incident, but nothing else happened the rest of the night or any day afterwards. We still ended up moving out a few months later, though, as we didn't feel very safe in the house after that incident. Every year, my town has a Halloween fair that opens up during the last week of October. It's basically just a bunch of Halloween-themed attractions like haunted houses and scary corn mazes. My friends and I like to go there before we started trick-or-treating, just to get us into the Halloween mood. So just like every other year, we met up there around 5. It was pretty busy, which is expected on Halloween, but basically every attraction had a really long line that was not worth waiting in. We looked around for a bit, then realized that the only thing with a short line was the corn maze. Something always made me feel weird about being in a corn maze. I think it was the fact that you kind of always feel lost and lose a sense of direction after a while. Anyways, we waited in line for a few minutes, then entered the maze. They had a bunch of creepy scarecrows and other props set up, which definitely made it more enjoyable than a regular corn maze. But after about 10 minutes, it got a little boring, and it felt as though we were just walking in circles. At one point, we crossed paths with some older guy in a scarecrow costume, who just kind of walked past us without saying anything. And then a few minutes later, we crossed paths again. I thought it was part of the attraction at first, but I also thought it was weird that he didn't actually try to scare us. Then again, it would also be weird for a grown man to be walking around alone in a corn maze, too. Another 10 minutes went by before we finally found our way out. We checked one more time to see how long the other lines were, but ended up just leaving as we didn't want to miss out on trick-or-treating for standing in a line all night. The fair was in the center of my neighborhood, so it made it easy to just cross a couple of streets and then start going house to house for candy. We'd gone to probably 20 houses and had made our way down a whole street before one of my friends in the group stopped us as we were walking down the sidewalk.
Isn't that the guy from the corn maze?
We looked up and towards where he was looking. Sure enough, the man in the scarecrow costume was standing on the other side of the street from us. He wasn't looking at us, though. He was staring at the house that he was standing next to. We all thought it was pretty weird, and knew now that the guy was definitely not working for the fair. We skipped the next few houses to get some distance from the man, just in case. Then we continued our trick-or-treating as usual. Only a couple minutes later, we all saw the creepy scarecrow guy on the same side of the road as us, and walking towards us this time. He was only a few houses down from us, and by now we definitely knew that there was something wrong with this guy. We walked quickly down to the next intersection and turned left. From there, we ran as fast as we could to get to the next turn and made a right, hoping that he wouldn't have been able to see where we went. By now, we were all a little freaked out and really had no idea what this guy was trying to do, but it was definitely creepy. One of my friend's houses was just up ahead though, so we figured we could stay there for half an hour to make sure that he was gone, and then we could head back out. I'd say we were inside for 10 minutes before we heard a soft rustling sound coming from outside one of the windows in the room that we were in. We all looked at each other, terrified of what we'd see if we moved the curtain from the window. But then I got up slowly and made my way over, and I peeked behind the curtain. The The man was standing just a few feet from the house, staring at the window with something in his hand. It looked like a hammer or a crowbar, but I backed away too quickly to fully comprehend what I saw. My friends knew exactly what the situation was, and we called 911 to report the guy for following us. Then my friend called his parents to let them know what was going on. It took a whole 5 minutes for the police to arrive, and during that time we didn't hear or see anything else. But as soon as the sirens were nearby, we all heard footsteps running away from the backyard. When the cops came up to the door, we explained in more detail what was going on, and they actually told us that there were multiple other reports of the guy in a scarecrow costume harassing people at the fair. We decided to just hang out at the house for the rest of the night, which really sucked because it kind of ruined our Halloween. But we all still had the feeling that that guy was somewhere not far, watching and waiting for us. I was 13 at the time and was in middle school. Our school was pretty small and nothing ever really happened, so I'd never been in any dangerous situation at school before this day. It was the start of the day, and I had just gotten to my second period class, which for me was English. The class went by as usual, with lectures and reading example writings. It was one of my least favorite classes, as I just found it boring. Anyways, the class was silent, as we were supposed to be reading an example paper, when suddenly the speaker makes a loud beep and turns on. We are now in lockdown. This is not a drill. Everyone in the class began looking around at each other, confused and a little nervous. Like I said, I just never thought anything would ever happen here, so it was really shocking and confusing to hear that we were in lockdown, and it made me wonder what was actually going on. After a few seconds, my teacher started taking command and told us all to line up on the side of the wall by the door. Then he rushed to lock the door and turn off all the lights, but I guess the power cut out before he was able to himself. A couple of the girls in the class started crying a little, which I understand as it was a pretty stressful and suspenseful situation. I want to say almost 10 minutes went by with absolutely no sounds or anything, before sudden running footsteps could be heard going through the hallway outside of our classroom. Once they reached our class, they stopped abruptly. I could feel the whole room holding their breath as we waited, listening nervously. Then a boy started banging on the door, pleading us to be let into the classroom. I was honestly terrified, as I couldn't tell how old the boy sounded, and I looked over at my teacher, who looked equally as terrified as all of us. He got up and moved towards the door slowly, looking through the window. Then he quickly opened the door and let the boy in. I recognized him from just seeing him walking around the hallways before, but we never had any classes together. My teacher asked if he was okay, and then told him to sit along the wall with all of us. Once we were all settled again, I leaned over and whispered to him, asking what happened. He said he was in the bathroom during the lockdown and waited for a while before some middle-aged man came in and started banging on all the stall doors. Apparently, once the guy banged on his stall, he crawled under the side of the stall and made a run for it. Luckily, the man only chased him down a small hallway before letting off. This sent chills down my body, as if I suddenly realized that this was really happening and we were in real danger by some crazy guy. Not even a minute later, clear, loud footsteps were heard approaching our classroom door. Some of the other kids in the room were holding their mouths shut, trying to muffle their crying, as a single bang on the door echoed through the room. A few seconds later, 2 or 3 more sets of footsteps walked up to the door, and the group began talking to each other. It was too muffled to hear what they were saying, but knowing that it was a whole group of dangerous men made my stomach drop. I looked over at my teacher, who was trying to calm one of the girls, but even he seemed terrified. Then one of the men outside yelled, and all their footsteps ran away. I guess the cops had finally shown up. I could feel the sense of relief from the whole class. We stayed there for another 20 minutes before it was all finally clear, and then the situation was dismissed. Apparently a whole group of sketchy guys walked in, asking to pull out one of their kids from a class. Obviously, none of them were actually parents to any of the kids, so the whole thing escalated, and they forced their way into the building. That's about all we were told, but it was definitely a situation that I'll remember for the rest of my life. This happened to me 2 years ago, and I know most people never experience a lockdown situation, and if they do, it usually would happen at school. But this actually happened to me during my retail job one night. I used to work in Des Plaines, which is a suburban area located north of Chicago. It was pretty much a regular day at work to start, and I mainly worked closing shifts because of school, so I'd get out around 10. Around 4 o'clock, my coworker started showing around news stories coming out about riots currently happening down in the city. This was due to a certain police incident that was happening at the time. It was pretty intense though, as the rioters were breaking into stores and completely trashing everything, and even beating up employees. I honestly wasn't entirely sure what the reasoning was for harming the stores, but it was crazy. By 6 o'clock, the riot and protests were only getting bigger, with thousands of people participating and hundreds of stores being destroyed and looted. There was even talk of action spreading over to the outer areas of Chicago, including some of the suburban areas nearby. I was definitely keeping my eyes open and watching customers to make sure I was prepared for anything to happen. Another 2 hours went by, and at this point it seemed like the entire city was going up in flames, and some of my coworkers actually left early because they were so nervous. My manager that was working that night was a really understanding guy, and we didn't have many customers coming in anyways, so he didn't mind them going home early. I stayed though, as I really wasn't too worried, and knew I wouldn't be getting paid unless I stayed. Pretty soon I realized that that was a mistake. I was stocking product in an aisle on the far left side of the store, which was opposite of the main entrance, when I heard some yelling outside. I went to the front of the aisle, where I could look out the windows towards the front of the store, and I could see some people running around, but the glare from inside made it hard to actually see what was going on through the window. I started making my way towards the entrance of the store when the intercom came on, and I could hear my manager announce that the store was now in lockdown and everyone needed to immediately make their way to the back. Against my better judgment, my curiosity got the best of me, and I went a little bit further so I could see out of the front doors, which I was unaware of at the time had already been locked shut. I saw 10 to 15 people running along the windows, banging on the glass and trying to push and smash the doors open. It was one of the most shocking things I've ever seen in my entire life. I immediately started sprinting to the back of the store, noticing other employees and customers doing the same. When I got to the back, I saw my manager guiding people into the large refrigerated room where we keep deli meat and produce. For those who haven't worked in grocery stores or any other place with refrigerated rooms, these rooms are basically large insulated coolers with a huge metal door and usually some plastic flaps on the entrance as well. Anyways, I made my way in. I must have been one of the last people to make it, as just a few seconds later my manager sealed the door and locked it from the inside. I felt pretty safe in there, as I knew nobody could realistically break in without some real heavy tools. But what scared me was how long I'd be in there for. Like, what if a whole mob of people waited outside the door? I'd say there was a good 30 to 40 people in there with me, and a lot of them were really panicking, asking us if that door was going to hold. My manager calmed them down a little bit, but that's when we started to hear noise from within the store. Stuff shattering, falling over, screaming and yelling. I'll admit, hearing those noises in real life was terrifying. I was shaking, as we could hear the sounds more and more clearly while they made their way towards the back of the store. Soon, their footsteps could be heard outside the room, and then a few seconds of silence before the door shook as someone attempted to open it. I guess they realized pretty quick that it was locked from the inside, and they started yelling and banging on it, screaming at us to open the door. We all tried to stay as quiet as we could, but some of the customers started crying as we could hear more people on the outside join in on the screaming and banging. One of them even yelled, "This is the police, open up," trying to fake us out or make fun of us or something. This went on for probably 15 minutes of constant banging and screaming before it began to slow down. Over the next 30 minutes, it slowly got calmer as most of them put their attention elsewhere. Every once in a while, someone would come around and bang on the door a few times and then leave. It took almost an hour of being in there for the police to clear the building and let us out safely. Walking out, the whole store was trashed. Shelves were pushed over, and product was scattered all over the floors. It was really crazy to see the store look like that. Anyways, as far as I know, the violence was mostly cleared overnight in the suburbs, but I think it continued down in Chicago for a few days. It was definitely the most intense situation I'd ever been in, though, and I'm glad everyone in the store was able to make it out unharmed. This happened a few years back during my sophomore year of high school. One thing I should mention is that I went to a public high school that was well known for being one of the largest in the country with a high graduation rate. Each of the 4 classes had over 1,000 students, and the faculty was probably around 1,000 as well, so there were about 5,000 people in the building at the time that this happened. As I would assume most other lockdowns start, the day was pretty normal. I had all my morning classes as usual, then ate lunch and started the second half of my day. I was in physics class at the time, and we were doing a project outside. I asked if I could go back in really fast to use the bathroom, and my teacher said sure. The bathroom was right by the entrance door, so I ran in and did my business. As I was washing my hands, a tall older man in a gray hoodie came in. He looked at me without saying anything and went into the far back stall. I quickly dried my hands and made my way outside. I found it really weird that the guy was dressed like that, because anyone that old had to have been a teacher or a staff member. I didn't recognize him at all, but the school was huge, and I really only knew about a fourth of the staff, so that wasn't exactly a big deal in my mind. Anyways, I went back outside, and after another 15 minutes of working, my teacher started bringing us back inside. Our school has certain areas that classes are allowed to be brought outside in, and the one we were at was pretty far from our classroom, about a 4-minute walk. Just as the whole class was inside and began making our way to the room, the announcement speaker came on abruptly and declared that the whole facility was now in lockdown. We all looked at the teacher, who was equally as confused, but immediately began rushing us towards the classroom while staying quiet. Halfway there, another teacher looked into the hallway and offered to take us in their classroom as it was large and had plenty of space. We all rushed in and sat against the wall while the two teachers talked amongst each other about what was going on. The whole time I sat there, I was thinking about that man that I'd seen in the bathroom and questioning if that was the reasoning for this lockdown. It gave me chills just thinking about how close I was to him. We were sitting silently for only a few minutes before we heard someone tapping softly on the window outside. Both teachers motioned for us to stay silent as the tapping continued. Then we heard footsteps in the hallway, making their way slowly towards our classroom door. There was a pause, and then a man yelled, "It's okay. I know there's a lot of you in there. Just open the door for me." I started panicking a little bit, and so did most of the class. The men could probably hear the loud crying coming from the room now. The man outside the door started getting more aggressive, yelling and swearing at us as he banged on the door. It sounded like he had a hammer or something, which made all of us even more terrified. This went on for a whole minute before the man that was outside the window yelled for him to stop and said that they had to go right away. Police sirens could be heard from the front of the school, but the man by the door continued banging for another 30 seconds before giving up, and we can hear him running back down the hall. The police caught him on his way out of the building, but they never found the second guy. When they released the man's picture, I didn't recognize him, so I still wasn't sure who the guy was in the bathroom, but I've always just assumed that he was the second man outside the window that they'd never caught. The general theory for the crime was that they were trying to break into the science classrooms to steal the expensive equipment, but I don't think that was ever confirmed, so it's still left as a mystery.